Reverend Adam Hill here. So he came here in '84. During the Rising, he became a United Irishman. After the Rising, he was lifted. During the Rising the 7th, that morning, he went with the people from here up to Donegal Hill, and throughout the day, he held a service on Donegal Hill. And supposedly it was said that he was one of the last men who left Donegal Hill once it was seen that all had failed in Antrim Town. And then the remnants from Antrim Town battle then came back up to Donegal Hill. But right. So after Adam Hill came back home here, the yeomanry opened up the gates of the barracks just a mile up this road here. They ran roughshod around the town, and I suppose at that point they had to, because everything was lost for the Presbyterians and United Irishmen, that they burnt nearly the whole town to the ground. Okay, he was then lifted after 1798, and he was sent into the Postlethwaite, which was a bulk ship. There was 2 bulk ships sent on base or moored on Belfast Lock. These are ships without the mast. They're just used as big containers to hold prisoners. So he was in there with a whole other United Irishman, and then he came out and there was a big trial held, and he was sentenced to 2 years imprisonment. However, what saved him from being killed, like the Reverend Porter in County Down and all our ministers, was that one of the militiamen came up in the court and said, "No, that isn't Adam Hill, that isn't the man I seen. The man I seen was nice and good looking. That boy's a bit disravelled and he's not a nice looking fella, you know." So that's what saved his life, basically, you know. So he was sentenced to 2 years, and then at that time, Castlereagh, he was trying to really subdue everything a bit, and you can see his mark we penned 2 weeks. So it went down from 2 years down to 2 weeks. And then he came back here, and he subsequently preached for another 20 years here in Ballymuir. So now we're going to hear from Keith Beattie, who used to be the curator of Ballymoney Museum. So we're going to hear from him now. Keith.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Stephen invited me along today, and I asked him if he wanted me to talk about Orr, but he said just talk about whatever you want. So I don't really know much other than what happened in '98 up in North Antrim. I do know that there were strong connections between North Antrim and Orr's story. For example, the jury that was there to judge Orr included a man called James McNaughton, who was one of the McNaughtons of Beardyville near Portrush, and also included a man called Bell, who was a land steward from Leslie Hill just outside Ballymoney, and then Archibald Thompson, who was the head juror. He came from Cushion Dun. So with those connections, the trial of Orr would have been very much on people's minds in North Antrim and in Ballymoney. And indeed the story is even more strongly linked with the association of a man called Joan Caldwell. Now Caldwell was from a family that lived just outside Ballymoney on Harmony Hill, which is now Ballinamore, and they were a very well-to-do linen family. John was the eldest son, and he became involved with the United Irishmen from a very early stage, in the early 1790s. He was very opposed to violence. He became very disheartened in the mid-1790s when they put aside their political ideals and began to focus more on armed rebellion, and to the extent that he decided he would not take part in any violent means, and instead he would collect money. He would run a lottery, raise money for United Irishmen and their families who had been jailed or put in prison. But he still worked hard with the society in Dublin and in Belfast, and in May 1798 he was arrested and imprisoned in Dublin. But his story gets interesting when you go back a year before that, when he becomes part of the legal team with Curran and Simpson and McGuckin at Orr's trial. And he's sort of the gopher, for want of a better word. He's doing all the running about, getting papers done and contacting people and things like that. And some of the stories he tells us that 2 of the jurors came and told him that they'd been tried with drink and forced by James McNaughton to pass a guilty verdict. And Caldwell says he went and told Curran about this, and Curran tried to get things overturned, but that failed. He also says that he was there the night before the execution with Orr and shared moments with him, his last hours. And according to him, Orr knew his time was coming, and we assume that's from the slide that we had already that composes the last message. Caldwell's younger brother, he was only 20 years old at this time, was called Richard. And Richard actually led the Ballymena United Irishmen in their march towards rebellion on the Saturday the 9th of June. Now what had happened at Ballymena was that everything had been quiet on the 7th of 8th of June while the rest of Antrim had been turned out. Things only start to really pick up on Friday night, the 8th of June. Now by this stage, the yeomanry, the garrison forces had retreated back to Coleraine. Many of the loyal subjects and the aristocracy, people in the big houses, had also retreated to Coleraine for sanctuary. And the Royal Ranks Fencibles in Coleraine had barricaded themselves into the town in expectation of an imminent attack by a large United Irish army. Nothing happened, and they sent out patrols into the countryside looking for the United Irishmen. Eventually they came back and told the commanding officer, Lord Henry Murray, that things were starting to gather in and around Ballymena. And in Ballymena that was the case. Realising that they were left on their own, Ballymena being a very staunch Presbyterian town, largely Presbyterian and largely involved in the United Irishmen, they were all gathering themselves and beginning to move to a gathering point where they assembled at a hill place called Kilrats. Now Ballymena, if you trace Ballymena's pedigree in the United Irishmen in the rebellion, you can go right back to 1791 when they were celebrating Bastille Day in the town. So it was very strongly supported in the area, and it's reported up to 5,000 people began to gather in that hill at Kilrats on that Friday evening. At 2 o'clock the following morning, Lord Henry Murray in Coleraine gives the signal that he wants the men to leave Coleraine and advance in Ballymena. And they street through the countryside during the night. And any farms that they knew where there were rebels, they attacked the burned the farm. Generally found it empty because the family had moved on to the hill at Kilrats. And they arrested anybody they could find. And eventually they reached Ballymena very early in the morning. And the town's deserted. There's a few people left, but most of the time was at Kilrats. Now at this time Ballymena would have been possibly a size of 2,000 people. So you can imagine the magnitude of that crowd that was gathering at Kilrats. The Crown forces burned the town of Ballymena unless you could present a proclamation that said that you'd sworn allegiance to the Crown, your house was burned. Now that meant that in those times towns were terraces. And so not only rebel houses but also loyal houses caught fire. In fact, some of the more prominent people of the town in the Church of Ireland also lost their property. Now Kilrats was far enough away that they could see the smoke rising from the town at that time. So the young Richard Caldwell had to make a decision. Was he going to go back to the town with his army and confront the Crown forces, or were they going to go to Ballymena and join their friends and form with them? Now he took the option to go to Ballymena, and he led his men on horseback in a horse stored from Open Hall, I think it was, all the way to Ballymena, and left Ballymena behind. And of course Ballymena, that Saturday, it was the beginning of the end. No sooner had the Ballymena United men arrived than they were turning and rushing back home and trying to save themselves. And that's when the court-martials and the executions began. It was military law, so if you were caught as a United Irishman, it wasn't the Crown judge that sentenced or judged you. It was Lord Henry Murray, the commander of the garrison, or indeed a local magistrate such as Edmund McNaughton, Beardable. And there's at least 3 United Irish graves in and around North Antrim that we know of, possibly more. And we know because, unlike the tradition of the time where the body was buried at the foot of the gallows, on these particular occasions the family went and retrieved the body and brought them back to Christian burial in a graveyard. And the first one I'll tell you about is a man called William Dunlop, or Dunlop, depending on your dialect, your Ulster Scots dialect. Now Dunlop came from a townland called Priestland, and we know quite a bit about his story because a member of the Royal Manx Festival wrote a journal, and he recorded his thoughts on what happened in those days after the rebellion. A man called Robert McCurley. He was a Scot, they joined the Manx Fencibles, and he was a member of the Crown Forces, but certainly in his later days you could sense a certain amount of sympathy for the people he was actually bringing under control in Antrim. Now, he talks about early in the morning of the 11th of June 1798. So Ballymena had cleared, we were going to clear on June the 9th, Saturday. People had fled to their homes and tried to get home to sanctuary or into hiding on the Sunday. And on the Monday morning, the Manx Fencibles descend on Priestland. And McCurley tells us that they went first to Edmund McNaughton's house in Beardeville. Now he was a magistrate, and if you go through the list of court marshals in and around North Antrim and Coleraine, McNaughton was one of the main men. He's the man in there making sure that he gets the justice he wants for these rebels. So they go to McNaughton, a staunch loyalist and no doubt a formidable enemy to the rebels. And this is McCurley speaking. I have entertained an opinion that he acted strictly in concert with Lord Henry Murray, and it seems very probable that much of what was done had his full concurrence and assistance in one form or another. Certain information had been given against Dunlop, and we directed our march to his house, which was situated not far from the moss or bog. The unfortunate man of whom we were in search, and those who were deeply concerned in his fate, must have been in a dreadful state of excitement during the time the soldiers were endeavouring to find out the place of his concealment. Their intention was to make an example of him by martial law. Unfortunately for Dunlop, they found him. McCurley states that one account is that he was found in a haystack. A certain Sergeant McCallum declared he saw his eyes shining through the covering of the hay. He was taken immediately and removed to Coleraine on horseback, where he was hanged without delay on the high street from a branch of the tree projecting over the wall of a churchyard. It seems Dunlop's house, which was set on fire, continued to burn for nearly 3 days, during which time it was gutted by those who followed the military, and also by people from Coleraine, who no doubt obtained with impunity a deal of good plunder. And James Hamilton of Strabane writes about Dunlop in a letter to Dublin, and he says that he's heard that executed in the town of Coleraine, Major Dickey, his executioner, was Dunlop. He acknowledged the justice of his sentence, but refused to give any information. That's not the only time that comment was made, and it's not possibly necessarily true. So Dunlop was buried at the foot of his gallows in Coleraine, and later that night, his family, the women of his family, came dressed as ghosts, and they scared off the sentry guarding the gallows, retrieved his body and took it to Derry Keegan in the churchyard, where he was buried. And a headstone was put up. He was a gentleman farmer, so a headstone was something his family could afford. And as I said, for many years it was painted green to mark his association with the United Irishmen. And you can see that headstone in Derry Keegan. A couple of weeks later, the court martials, of course, were taking place in Coleraine and in Ballymoney. And at around the time that Dunlop had been arrested, they'd also arrested a man called Gamble when he returned from Ballymena. Gamble was a soap maker in Church Street, and for 2 weeks he was kept in prison, in the jail, the Dark Hole, and then he was court-martialed and sentenced for execution. He was asked to inform on his friends, but in his own words, he said that he would have to die one day, and he would die an honest man, and he would never betray his friends. So he was taken and he was hanged from the town clock on the 25th of June 1798. And the entire town was forced out to watch the punishment in an attempt to make them turn away from the United Irish principles. The story doesn't end there, because 85 years later, 14th September 1883, they were putting a new a new water pipe, from Dunlop reservoir, and they came across a body buried at the foot of the clock. And they knew that a few men had been seen from that clock, but Gamble's family were still around, and they came and seen the skeleton as it was, and they were sure it was their family member. So they acquired a coffin, they put the skeleton, the remains, into a new coffin, and they led a funeral procession through the town to the old churchyard, and they buried Alexander Gamble in the grave there. And I said it was one of the largest funerals ever in Ballymoney. And at that time, Ballymoney, though strongly associated with unionism today, would have been still strongly anchored in that United Irish sentiment. There was still that liberality in that town, and they still believed in the principles of the United Irishmen. And to be fair, if you talk to the people in the town today, they understand their legacy and the roots of the United Irishmen. And while they understand it's associated with very much a nationalist perspective today, they regard it as very much a Presbyterian movement, and something that they can still believe in and the principles of. Now I'll finish with another grave, but this time it's a magistrate, a man called George Hutchinson, or George Bloody Hutchinson. Bloody Hutchinson, his house was burned whenever the town of Ballymoney was burned. His house caught fire by mistake. At that time he was with the Dunlop cavalry sweeping through the countryside. And the difficulty was, people like Hutchinson went out through the countryside and burned farms and arrested rebels. And they also would have been out to catch their neighbours and undermine the United Irishmen in the town and arrest people they knew to be involved there. But the difficulty for Hutchinson was he was living right in the middle of them, amongst them. And that's probably why he gets his reputation of Bloody Hutchinson. Because certainly other magistrates like MacNaughton were much more influential and condemned many more people to transportation and execution. But Hutchinson was there. He also got over £650 compensation and rebuilt a very, very nice manor house in the middle of the town as well, so that wouldn't have went down well. There were at least 3 attempts to assassinate him. So we look back, and he was 38 years old at the time of the rebellion, and he must have really rubbed the people of Ballymoney up the wrong way. But he still lived there, he still stayed there. Ironically, he found great support amongst the Roman Catholic population, and indeed he gave land to them to build a chapel, and there are notices in the paper in the early 1800s where the Roman Catholic congregations of Rashark and Finboy and Dunlop pledged their loyalty to George Hutchinson, and that they will support him if another rising occurs, which obviously wouldn't have gone down well with the Presbyterian people either. He's associated with a few executions. He said he'd been the man responsible for Gamble's execution, and also 2 young men called Bonneton and Adams, who were hanged at Dungorbry Hill around March 1800. It's interesting that this United Irish movement in Ballymoney wasn't in any way coerced in 1798. It continued right up until 1801, 1802. There was an axis of rebellion after 1798, you could call it, between Ballymena and Ballymoney, where the activities continued, keeping people like Hutchinson busy. And it's said that, as happened with Gamble, they were digging up a road at Dungorbry Hill and they found the 2 young men's bodies in around the 1840s, and they carried one of the bodies back into Ballymoney, and they stopped outside Hutchinson's house. They put the coffin down and and they gave 3 cheers